I recently was asked a couple of good questions. I thought I would do a video answering these two questions because they are related and they help answer each other. And I'm sure that many others have the same questions. The first question was, can you please show me in the Torah where we are commanded to keep the Sabbath based on the lunar rotations? And the second question was, can you show me where it says in Scripture that we are to celebrate the new moon days? It is very good to ask questions if you really want the answers. For most, they are grounded in their false beliefs and asked only to taunt, but these are two very important questions because we have to be right with the Sabbaths and when they are and when His commanded worship days are. But most simply have no fear of being wrong and tell me how it is in the world of what is truth according to them and what they believe. What is important to understand is that the Torah is not simply the commandments given at Mount Sinai. It is a path that includes His mitzvah, and chakah, and chok, and chakak, and mishpah. The best English words that I can think of to use to describe these are commandments, statutes, ordinances, guidelines, and judgments. They are waymarks or road signs to keep us on His Torah, which is His path that teaches us His perfect character. Everything is not spelled out in detail in Scripture, much because things were simply a way of life to them, and much has been lost because man has not guarded it as we were commanded to. But He gave us the shell, and He offers us His 7 spirits to guide us into all truth if we will follow the signs that He gave us. When things stopped being a way of life, they were lost. And He told us to guard or to hedge about His Torah so that it would not be lost. That's why things are needing to be restored now as well. For this reason, Israel was scattered to the 4 corners of the world because they did leave His path. I say that the Torah is all of these because precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little, shows this to be true. I will start with answering the question about the weekly Sabbath. Certainly keeping the weekly Sabbath is a commandment. I don't think anyone would argue with that. So knowing that this is a commandment, we must assume that He instructed us how to know when to show up for it, even if we were to be scattered throughout the world, which He knew that He would do as well. It is a matter of believing Him. First, you must determine how the Sabbaths are classified. Just like His annual feast or chags, they are appointed times, or moedim, or moeds, or however you pronounce that word. We read this in Leviticus 23, starting in verse 2. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them concerning the appointed times of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my appointed times. And translations call these feasts, but that's a different word for feast. It's the word chag, so look up the words. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work therein. It is Yahweh's Sabbath in all of your dwellings. These are the appointed times of Yahweh, even holy convocations which you shall proclaim in their appointed times. Then he goes on to list the other appointed time, of which are the 3 chags, or the 3 feasts, are included in them, along with the Day of Atonement and the memorial of the blowing of trumpets. So now we know that the Sabbaths are appointed times. Now all we need to do is find out what He says about His calendar and how to determine when they are. The instructions start off in Genesis 1:14. And Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs. And He says the Sabbath is a sign as well, and for appointed times. And of course we just determined that the Sabbath is an appointed time, and to determine days and years. He is very clear and straightforward and leaves nothing up for chance on this subject. He gave us His luminaries for signs and for appointed times and to keep track of time with. He didn't say to devise our own calendar. Now it is just a matter of believing Him and letting the rest of Scripture define it and prove it to us. An example of His proof is all weekly Sabbaths that are mentioned by date in the Scripture are either on the 8th day, the 15th day, the 22nd, or the 29th days of the month, with no exceptions. In the continual revolving 7-day week, they cannot be on, they could be on any day of the month, and they are, of course, on man's calendar. You just look and land on whichever day that they land on. And never in Scripture is a weekly Sabbath on the same day as the new moon day. They are always mentioned separately, both have a different set of instructions. Nor would he have commanded the children of Israel to break his Sabbath by marching around Jericho. And they marched 7 consecutive days. How could they have done this in a 7-day continual rotation? They could not. But with his true calendar, it is possible, and it is how it happened. This is the beautiful thing about his word. It proves itself. And it's explained how it happened. They started marching on the new moon day, but I got that in other videos. I could keep moving forward here today. If you think that Yahweh Elohim commanded his children to march on the Sabbath just to uphold your false calendar, that is your choice. There really is much proof like this if you really want to believe that his word defines his calendar. Psalms 104:19 says that he appointed the moon for his appointed times, his Moedim. Pretty clear. I'll give you another example of letting Scripture define itself. It's kind of a little bit unrelated, but Jewish tradition upholds that, it's not totally unrelated, but Jewish tradition upholds that each day begins at sundown the day before, yet Scripture clearly refutes this in several places. They pervert the phrase, and the evening or the Ereb, and the morning were the first day, and the second day, and so on through the 6th day in the creation account to support their error. And they say that since the afflicting of our souls associated with the Day of Atonement begins at sundown the night before, and because we are to begin to eat unleavened bread the evening before the first day of unleavened bread, that this is proof? No, these are just specific instructions for 2 different high days. They have nothing to do with when the day begins, nor does the creation account in Genesis. Elsewhere, his word defines when the day begins and which night that the day belongs to. As with all things, it is a matter of believing Scripture and not writing our own ideas into it to make up traditions of men and to uphold traditions of men. I discussed this in detail in the 2-part Sundown to Sundown video series, but I am bringing it up today because if you believe in Judaism's calendar, then the children of Israel left Egypt on a high day. They certainly did leave on the 15th and came to Sinai on the 15th, but it was in the night, which is not part of the Sabbath. They traveled by night because it was cool, and they were led by the fire. 6 million people traveling through the desert, that's when you would travel. The point is, we have to let Scripture tell us what is true and define itself and not believe the doctrines and traditions of men. I've discussed the proof that the weekly Sabbaths are determined by the new moons each month in the Remember the Sabbath video and in our Creator's Calendar video and in some other videos as well, but those 2 by title. And these videos even discuss some of the proof that is out there historically as well. It cannot be denied. At least it cannot be denied unless you simply refuse to let go of your false beliefs and your stubborn pride. That certainly will keep you from being able to see the truth. The proof is impossible to refute, but in this video I will only point out to you these other videos, 2 videos, because I want to get to the second question, so I need to keep moving. I know it's going to make this long as it is. If you fear being wrong, you will examine the evidence. If you do not fear, then you will simply bury your head back in the sand and close your eyes. The main thing to understand is that Satan's purpose to set on the mount of the appointed time, so the perversion of it was prophesied to happen. Isaiah records this in chapter 14, and Daniel records in Daniel 7 that his servants would set the purpose to change time and laws. Also, history shows that during the days of Constantine, Constantine forbade the Jews to use their method of calendar rates to determine the calendar. Because of this, the Jewish people of the day fixed the day on Saturday on the pagan Roman calendar for convenience and to avoid persecution. Of course, they were still persecuted anyway. And just think about one simple thing. In the Hebrew calendar, the days were not named. They had the first day of the week, the second day, and the third day, and so on. If the weeks were a continual non-interrupted cycle, you could have the first day of the month on the second day of the week 1 month, and then you could have the first day of the month on the 5th day of the week in another month, and so on. Or you could have the 7th day of the week on the 12th day of the month, or the 13th day, or the 14th day of the week on the 12th day of the month, and so on. Can you imagine trying to keep track of this? The Sabbath could be on the first day or the 10th day or whatever. It would have been an impossibility to keep straight. The only reason we are able to keep it straight today is because we name the days and of course have calendars printed and such, and we grew up with it. Do you think that our Creator would have given such a system? No. It is a matter of believing His word, precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little, as Isaiah records in chapter 28. Okay, now with the new moon days, this will even make it all fit together that much more completely, because there is so much proof in Scripture of the new moons being commanded worship days and tying them in with the Sabbaths and separating the two of them. Isaiah 66 is clear that we will all worship on the new moon days when Yeshua returns. And one of the many proofs in Scripture that they did worship on this day back then is found in Amos 8, verses 4 and 5. He said, "Hear this, you that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor of the land to fail, saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit." Amos is admonishing them and us that our greed is what gets in the way, and that we put our greed and our deceit before His worship days in our hearts. Even if they were even observing the days back then, but they were wanting them to be over so they could go about their whoredom. It is clear that no buying and selling was allowed on the new moon day back then. So now you have to ask yourself the question, under the guidelines of precept upon precept, since they set this day aside back then, and we will set it aside in the future when Yeshua returns, why not now? It's a question you have to ask yourself. If you say that we are not commanded to now, then I ask you to show me where you find this in the Scriptures. Everybody's wanting to say, prove to me when that we worship the new moons. Well, prove to me that we don't. That's the question I have. There are many, many more proofs as well to prove that they worship on the new moons, and I will show you them. I will give them to you, since the question was, show me where in Scripture that we are commanded to celebrate them. Here's a collection of verses proving the new moons are worship days and separate from the Sabbaths. And keep in mind that it is not possible to have the new moon days on a separate day in a continual 7-day cycle. This cannot be accomplished with the continual 7-day rotation, because they would overlap. The new moon days would be able to land on the Sabbaths, and this cannot be if you are to reconcile Scripture. It never happens in Scripture. 2 Chronicles 31, verse 3, he says, "He appointed also the king's portion of his substance for the burnt offerings, to wit, for the morning and evening burnt offerings, and the burnt offerings for the Sabbaths, and for the new moons, and for the set feast, as it is written in the law," or the Torah of Yahweh. Pretty clear that's written in the Torah. It sounds to me like they were commanded to be set apart in the Torah, just as the Sabbaths and the feast were, and just as we are too. In 2 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 12, "Then Solomon offered burnt offerings to Yahweh on the altar of Yahweh, which he had built before the porch, even after a certain rate every day, offering according to the commandment of Moses, on the Sabbaths and on the new moons, and on the solemn feasts 3 times in a year, even in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles." So it lists the 3 feasts. I don't see the Day of Atonement being listed in the 3 feasts. It's not one of the chags. It's not mentioned as such, and neither is the memorial blowing of trumpets. Those are separate high days. It sounds to me like they were separated according to the commandments of Moses. They separated these days apart. But are they only for the sacrifices? Isaiah says that all will worship on them. And we read in 1 Chronicles chapter 23, "And stand every morning to thank and praise Yahweh, and likewise at eve, and to offer all burnt sacrifices unto Yahweh in the Sabbaths, and in the new moons, and on the set feast by number, according to the order commanded to them continually before Yahweh." It certainly looks like thanking Him and praising Him was tied in with the sacrifices. In Nehemiah chapter 10, "We must stand upon the commandments of the mitzvah, to give upon yearly a third part of a shekel for the service of the house of our Elohim, for the showbread, and for the continual meat offerings, and for the continual burnt offerings, and the Sabbaths, and of the new moons, and for the set feast, and for the holy things, and for the sin offerings, to make an atonement for Israel, and for all of the work of the house of our Elohim. In 2 Kings chapter 4, and she called to her husband and said, Send me, I pray you, one of the young men and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of Elohim and come again. And he said, Why do you want to go to him today? It is neither a new moon nor a Sabbath. Pretty clear that she would have been wanting to see this man of Elohim on one of those days, and this was neither of those days. He wanted to know why she was wanting to go. 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 4, Behold, I build a house to the name of Yahweh Elohim, to dedicate it to him, and to burn before him sweet incense, and for a continual showbread, and for the burnt offerings morning and evening, and the Sabbaths and the new moons, and on the solemn feast of Yahweh Elohim. This is an ordinance forever to Israel. Ezra chapter 3, verse 5, and afterward offered the continual burnt offering, both on the new moons and all the set feasts of Yahweh that were consecrated, and of every one that willingly offered a freewill offering unto Yahweh. In Isaiah 1, he is condemning them for celebrating him on these days in the following verses because of their abominations, yet it is still proof that they were observing them. They were just observing them in vain. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 13, Bring no more vain obligations. Your incense is an abomination to me. The new moons and the Sabbaths, the calling of the assemblies, I cannot away with. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They are a trouble to me. I am weary to bear them. Of course, he does not hate his appointed times and his new moons. He gave them to us and commanded them to us. Isaiah is recording that because of their or our abominations, he hates them. This should make you think as well. You mean to tell me I can come before him and worship him even on the proper time and be abominable to him? You better believe it. I mentioned Isaiah 66 about when Yeshua returns, and here's the verse, starting in verse 22, Because as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before him, says Yahweh, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, says Yahweh. Ezekiel 45, And it shall be the princess apart to give burnt offerings and meat offerings and drink offerings in the feast and in the new moons and in the Sabbaths. In all the solemnities of the house of Israel he shall prepare the sin offering and the meat offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings to make reconciliation for the house of Israel. Ezekiel 46, Thus says Yahweh, The gate of the inner court that looks toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be open, and in the day of the new moon it shall be open. And the prince shall enter in by the way of the porch with that gate without, and shall stand by the post of the gate, and the priest shall prepare his burnt offerings and his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate, and then he shall go forth, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. Likewise, the people of the land shall worship at the door of this gate before Yahweh in the Sabbaths and in the new moons. Pretty plain and simple. It is very important to notice that the Sabbaths and the new moons are always separate. And I said before, this could not be with and cannot be with a continual rotation. The real hypocrisy is those calling themselves Jewish today and those following their calendar know that the other appointed times, such as the 3 annual feasts and the Day of Atonement and the memorial of the blowing of trumpets, are determined by the new moon. They use a perversion of the new moons for determining these days, but not the Sabbath. This is hypocrisy. They use one calendar for these days, and then they use the pagan calendar for the weekly Sabbaths. Does our Creator really have 2 different counts going on, one for the weeks and one for the months? Ezekiel 46, And in the day of the new moon it shall be a young bullock without blemish, and 6 lambs and a ram, they shall be without blemish. There were even additional sacrifices on the new moon days, as we will read in this verse and in the following verses on Numbers 28, start at verse 11. And in the beginning of your months, or the new moons, you shall offer a burnt offering unto Yahweh, 2 young bullocks and 1 ram, 7 lambs of the first year without spot, 3/10 deal of flour for a meat offering, mingled with oil, for 1 bullock, and 2/10 deals of flour for a meat offering, mingled with oil for 1 ram, and a several tenth deal of flour mingled with oil for a meat offering unto 1 lamb, and a burnt offering for a sweet savor, a sacrifice made by fire unto Yahweh. And their drink offering shall be a half of a hin of wine unto a bullock, and a third of a hin unto a ram, and a 4th part of a hin unto a lamb. This is the burnt offering of every month throughout the months of the year. And 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering unto Yahweh shall be offered, beside the continual burnt offerings and his drink offering. In Hosea 2, verse 11, I will also cause her myrrh to cease on the feast days, and on the new moons, and on the Sabbaths, and all the appointed times. Numbers 10:10, also in the day of your gladness, and in your appointed times, and in the beginnings of your months, or your new moons, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may be to you a memorial before your Elohim. I am Yahweh Elohim, he says. Excuse me. 1 Samuel 20, verse 5, and David said to Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to set with the king at meat, but let me go, that I may hide myself in the field for 3 days until a reb, or until the afternoon. And the new moons were always a 2-day break before the sundial event with Hezekiah. I spoke about this in other videos. David was expected to show up both of these days before the king. The 29th is always the 4th Sabbath. This is the day that David is speaking to Jonathan here. He would have gone out that evening after the Sabbath day. Then there was an intermission festival day, and this is the day that David is referring to here as tomorrow, and the following day is the new moon day. He no doubt reckoned them both as new moon days. That's probably how they grouped them together. I say probably, it's obviously how they grouped them together. In 3 days, Jonathan was to send him a sign in the afternoon. This is just how Yahweh's calendar works. There is no other way to reconcile scriptures. Jonathan did not go shoot the arrow into the field until the 3rd day after David instructed him, which would have been the 2nd day of the month. It is beautiful how scripture ties it all together. Those who are holding on to a fixed 7-day rotation have to deny all of these scriptures. There is no way around the lunar solar calendar if you simply believe Elohim and his servants. It was just a way of life. And it is clear from history that it was being done this same way when Yeshua came the first time. History proves this. The only proof for a fixed 7-day rotation is taking the commandment, 6 days you shall work, and the 7th day is a day of rest by itself, and leaving out the rest of Scripture. And this commandment is true, and it fits perfect into his calendar, because there are 4 7 weeks each month. And 6 days you work, and the 7th day you rest, just like he says. Then you have a 2-day break that is capped off with the new moon day. Of course, now we sometimes do not have the 30th day, but this too will soon be restored when Yeshua returns and restores it. Pause here for a second, let the motorcycle go by. The continuous 7-day cycle theory does not fit into any of these verses that I have shared with you, nor does it fit many other verses, nor history, nor into his luminaries that he gave us to keep track of them with. The 7-day cycle is not found in the luminaries except for within his obvious calendar. And of course, going back to Genesis 1:14, he says he gave us the luminaries to keep track of days and months and years. So how do you reconcile this even in itself with that one verse with the 7-day cycle? Can't be done. The thing that keeps most from accepting this is how it would rock their world. The world certainly isn't user-friendly to a 7-day continual cycle. This is true with the 7th year annual Sabbath that we are commanded as well. And we are actually in the 7th year annual Sabbath, but it's amazing how nobody is interested in knowing about that either, or obeying that. It is just so far different than what we grew up with, and it seems hard to understand, but It really is simple when you understand it, and when you let it become a way of life, it just becomes your clock. The beautiful thing about his lunar solar calendar is it teaches us that our lives must revolve around him. Just as the 7th year Sabbath teaches us to depend on being in his favor so that he will bless us for the 7th year. Being in his favor has to become a way of life. How beautiful is that? I want to add another scripture for those of you who say that the new moons were done away with. Of course, I'd like, again, that challenge. Show me where they were done away with. Everybody wants me to show them where in scripture. I should count these verses I just gave you. So show me where it's done away with. Well, you want to quote Saul. Yeah, there you go. Good luck with that one holding up for you. Here is what my Father says to you. In Jeremiah 31, verse 35 and 36, thus says Yahweh, I will give the sun for a light each day, and the ordinances or the chakah of the moon and the stars for a light at night, and I divide the sea from the roaring waves. Yahweh of hosts is my name. If these ordinances or chalks depart from before me, says Yahweh, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. This certainly is an interesting choice of words that he chose to use here. He uses the words that can best be translated as statutes or ordinances and associates them with, if he does away with them, then the seed of Israel will cease. This is a promise that his ordinances will not pass away. His word endures forever. This is also why Yeshua said that until heaven and earth pass away, not one crossing of a T or dotting of an I would pass from the Torah until all be brought to pass. And I still see heaven and earth up there in the skies. I suggest that you stop holding on to what is false and turn to the truth that will set you free. I added in my reply to the person with these questions to be careful. There are many out there who have come to see the truth about his calendar, but some still have their own ideas on how it works. They have not come all the way out of the bondage, and Satan still has their ear. It is easy to determine if they are walking in the truth by evaluating if they have the rest of his commandments or not. This is how you can know who his saints are, along with those who have the same faith that Yeshua has. The proof that he has given both in Scripture and in what he has not let Satan hide in history shows that what I have spoken is true. And it is a very, very important topic that we each must have right. And remember,